What's up, everybody? Today on Auto Joe, we are featuring this 2017 Mazda 3 Sport Trim with a manual transmission. And so, of course, Mazda has been one of the manufacturers that continues to make manual transmissions in 2025. Of course, this 2017 model is brought to us by First International Auto Group out of Merrimack, New Hampshire. This one's priced just under $13,000 on their site and has 96,000 miles on it. Before we get out on the road, let's go check out the exterior of the car. So of course we have the hatchback version of the Mazda 3 with the 16-inch alloy rims, which complement the car pretty well. Front end of a Mazda 3 looks just like this, and any other Mazda on the market besides the Miata, really. On the side of this car, as you can see, we have some pin striping. I actually don't know off the top of my head if that's stock or not, but it's there. And then last thing to note is we have our lovely badging as well as dual exhaust pipes, one that runs from each side of the car. So in these back seats, I am 5'9" and I sit pretty comfortably. I have about 2.5 inches of headroom, maybe 3.5 inches of legroom. Even though this seat is pushed up a bit, sitting behind myself, I would have a little less room, but note my seat is also pushed up a little more than normal because I'm driving stick today. There's not much else in these back seats. We do have some cup holders on the door cards and only one little flap here to hold books or anything like that in it. This hatch is manual. It doesn't just open on its own. There are springs to help it go up, but that's what we got. We have our mats back here, a little privacy screen. Obviously you can, fold down those seats and get more room into the cabin if you need. And that's really the practicality of a hatchback. So powering this Mazda 3 is a naturally aspirated 2-liter 4-cylinder that makes 155 horsepower and 150 pound-feet of torque. Of course, this is the manual transmission one, so this car weighs just above 2,800 pounds. And about 250 pounds lighter than the automatic. So you do have that going for you, but this car won't, a little spoiler alert, is pretty slow. All right, let's get this thing out on the road and see how it is. So as we make our way out of the mall parking lot, let's talk about this interior a bit. So it's pretty bare bone in here. We do have black cloth seats and a lot of hard plastic throughout the interior. And of course, we also have a lot of blank buttons, this being the lowest Mazda 3 trim. However, the manual transmission adds some engagement, although I might add not exciting engagement. There is engagement here. So although these are cloth seats and they have manual adjustments and we don't have heated seats or a heated steering wheel, these seats are very comfortable. I could see myself doing a lot of miles in this car, just really based off the fact that it's ergonomic. So going back to the engine noise and exhaust noise, you really just don't get it. You get more noise from your tires than you do the transmission. So I'm finding myself looking at the tach a lot more than I should be, just kind of making sure I'm in the right gear. There's not a lot of sound deadening in here. It's very noisy, and I think a lot of that has to do with these tires. So we do have a heads-up screen here. It's not a heads-up display, but a screen that kind of pops up. We don't have CarPlay, but we do have navigation in here. And of course you can hook up via Bluetooth, which I've found that in my past cars is more than enough. CarPlay is a nice to have, but not entirely necessary. So regarding this steering wheel, it's very ergonomic. It is hard plastic, just like everything else in this car, but it's, nicely shaped to your hands, has all the buttons you need, such as your cruise control, your volume control, and your skip track, and your hang up and call button, which they have 2 different buttons for that, which I don't entirely deem necessary. You can just have one button that does both, but it's there. As far as how the gauge cluster is set up, I wish the tachometer was bigger and the speedometer was smaller. I just think that'd be easier for someone who's learning stick, especially since, this car is so quiet. So as far as looks, I haven't been the biggest fan of what Mazda puts out, but this Mazda 3 looks better as the hatch than it does as the sedan. I feel like the sedan just like, it's very disproportionate, especially in the back. I just feel like the back and the front aren't all that cohesive with each other, but you know, that's just my personal taste. So regarding the clutch and the shifter, truth be told, I don't have a ton of manual transmission car experience. I haven't had a lot of seat time in different ones, so I don't necessarily know how to, you know, diagnose a good transmission versus a bad manual transmission. But I will say I like the shifter. I like the design of it. I appreciate the clear, you know, diagram of where the gears are. For someone who's, you know, on the newer side and doesn't spend a ton of time in manual cars, I think that's good to have. The clutch is very light, but you do get a little sense of where that engage point is, which I appreciate. So the first manual transmission car I ever learned in was a Mazda 3, but the first car I ever drove that was a manual transmission was a V6 Camaro. And I will say that thing has the lightest clutch possible. And of course, you know, I was very new to driving stick at the time too, but I just like couldn't really feel where that engage point was. And so it was kind of hard for me to learn stick that way. So as far as ports in this car, we have 2 USBs, and we also have an auxiliary port right here on the front dash, which I can appreciate if you don't want to hook up with Bluetooth. That is a, you know, a good thing to be able to do, is hook up with auxiliary. So even higher in the RPMs, and you know, this thing has a 6,800 redline, you just don't really get a lot of sense of power. I mean, 150 horsepower, even in a fairly light car, which for modern standards, if anything is under 3,000 pounds, that is a light car. And here this fits the bill, this Mazda 3. But yeah, there's just not a lot of propulsion, there's not a lot of excitement. I think a couple modifications and an exhaust would go and, you know, do wonders to this car. But honestly, I'm not sure if there is a lot of aftermarket support for Mazda 3s. I think this car being a naturally aspirated 2-liter 4-cylinder, you know, there's not a lot of things you could do with it. I wonder if Flying Miata hooks up the Mazda 3 peeps. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments if you own a Mazda 3 and have some modifications for it. Maybe give the other viewers a little bit of insight as to what you have. So regarding the pedal box and the overall feel of, you know, having to push your seat a little forward and sit just right for manual transmission purposes, you get a lot of room. You know, my left leg has a lot of breathing room, which I appreciate. The pedals are fairly spaced apart, the clutch being over to the left a lot more than, you know, in some cars I've driven where you almost feel like you're gonna hit the brake pedal when you're trying to clutch in. So I think as far as ergonomics, Mazda's really done a good job here, and I think they have a lot of experience from doing Miatas over the years with manual transmissions that this is just really second nature to them. So we're about to turn onto the worst road in Merrimack, New Hampshire. So we're gonna see what that is like, and we'll be able to assess the ride quality of this Mazda 3 hatchback. So everybody knows the rules, so everybody's on the same page here. So 20 miles an hour is what we approach this, you know, this section of bumpy roads with any car. And let's see how it behaves, huh? Actually, want to downshift here. All right, so it actually handled it pretty well. I feel like, you know, this car is set up to be pretty soft already. And yeah, I'm actually very pleasantly surprised. I'd say it's pretty on par with, you know, some of their SUVs, such as the, you know, CX-5. Maybe not any of the bigger ones, because that's when you're getting into the longer wheelbases and, you know, better ride quality. But, you know, this is pretty good for being a, you know, a low hatchback. All right, while we're stopped, let's check out this backup camera. As you can see, it's kind of like a fisheye view, but it's fairly high resolution for 2017, not too shabby. Alright, so to wrap up my review on this Mazda 3, I will say that it's very ergonomic, right? There's not a lot of standard features in here, but we do have a very thoughtful design on, our driver's position, the position of our clutch pedal. The shifter itself is fairly nice looking and is kind of notchy and doesn't have a lot of play in gear. We have a good visibility throughout the cabin. I'd say where we're most compromised is that rear window. But overall, very thoughtful design. Not the greatest high quality materials in here, but there's no bumps, no rattles, and this would be just a fantastic driver's car for, someone who's learning stick, maybe a 16 or 17-year-old who, this could be their first car. Definitely check out this one at First International Auto Group out of Merrimack, New Hampshire. I think this would be a great first car for somebody, and honestly, I wish I had one of these when I was that age, because I was driving a 1999 V6 Mercury Cougar with an automatic that just absolutely sucked. So I wish I learned stick at that point instead of, trying to have to practice it at 26 years old. But that's just kind of how things played out for me. Anyways, this is a great car, a great option for somebody who wants a 6-speed manual transmission, the practicality of the hatchback, and overall great ergonomics that Mazda has to offer. With that being said, thank you for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and I will see you all next time on Auto Joe. Bye-bye.